Hello everyone. So in today's video, we're going to take a look at a couple of ways to initialize a Spring Boot application. We're going to look at two methods, and actually both of these methods are doing the same thing, but the only difference is the interface. And we're going to import both projects into IntelliJ, and we're going to pick up from that in Monday's class. So the first method is we navigate over to start.spring.io, and we're going to have a lot of these choices that we can make for what we want our project to be like. So the first thing we'll do is pick the Maven project. Our language will be Java. We're going to keep Spring Boot in its default version, and we can name our group as well as our name, whatever we want. I'll leave everything as default just for this demonstration, and we're going to pick our packaging, which is jar, and our Java version, which is 22. So I've just recently upgraded to 22, so this is the one that I'll pick. In addition to that, we're going to have some dependencies. So the ones that I would recommend us to add would be web. So Spring Web gives you all of the tools that you'll need to start building a RESTful API, and we're going to start talking about what that is on Monday. I'm also going to add the dev tools. So dev tools, this is not necessarily that important, but if we don't have it, we'll have to do a lot of manual restarting of the server whenever we make changes, but this will just kind of make our life a little bit easier. The third one I'm going to add is an actuator, which also is not very important, but it allows us to be able to do some kind of monitoring on our web server. All right, so I'll add those three dependencies, but the most important one is Spring Web. I'm going to generate it, and this is going to allow us to download a demo file, or whatever name that I've called it. I'm going to unzip this onto my desktop, and I'm going to head over to IntelliJ, and we're going to open the project. So I'm going to find it on the desktop, and we're going to open this project. And once it opens, it's going to look something like this. All right, so if we drill down and take a look at the structure of the application, we're going to have a demo application that looks something like this. And the first time that you run it, you may need to head over to the side here where it says Maven, and you may need to reload all Maven projects. So the reason for that is because if you're running this for the first time, IntelliJ may not have built the project by itself, or especially if you're downloading it from the internet, sometimes it just doesn't build it automatically. So reload all Maven projects, and then you can go over to the application that you have. This one, in our case, is called demo, and we're going to go into lifecycle, and we're going to install. Now, in my case, it's already installed, so I can simply just run it. So I'm just going to close this up, and I'm going to run this application. And if everything goes properly, you'll see that it's actually kind of in a waiting phase. I'll actually run this one more time using a different method, but then once we get this up and running, then we can pretty much be happy that this is actually listening. All right, so I'm going to stop this one, and I'm going to open up a new project. So I'm going to do a new project, and this time I'm going to start up a new Spring Boot project. So this is actually using the same method. It's still going to start.spring.io, but it's just giving us a new interface. I find that if you do have this version of IntelliJ, the ultimate version of IntelliJ, that this might be an easier way to go, because usually it will automatically download everything and build the project for you. So again, I'll just leave everything as default. Pick Maven, Java, and I'll leave everything by default. You should probably change this for a real project. We're using this SDK and version 22. This packaging will be jar, and then we'll go to next. We're going to create it, and we can add the dependencies here, so we can look for the same dependencies. So Spring Web, there are also the dev tools that we were looking for, so we can add that, and we can also add the actuator. So Spring Boot actuator as well. All right, so once we create this project, I'll just kind of open up this window, and we're going to see that our application is very similar to the last one that we saw. And this one also has a demo 1 application. And if we open that up, you should see that everything is already quite ready to run. Now let's take a look at a little bit of the structure of the Spring Boot application. And again, we will pick up on this in Monday's class. So our resources, under our resources folder, we have a static and we have template. Primarily, we will be working in the static folder. So in our static folder, this is, as the name suggests, going to serve static requests only. So I'm going to actually just put something into the static folder just so that we can play around with it. All right, so I've just put in the static folder an icon.png. So we'll take a look at that in 1 second. This is possibly a resource that we might need for our web application. So in order to run this web application, we can just do run application.main. And basically, we're running this Spring Boot application. Okay, so again, you'll see that the feedback that you're getting is very similar to what we saw in the other demo application. I want to take a look at a couple of things. So first of all, as it's starting up, you can see that there's some feedback. We are running Tomcat. We're running HTTP on port 8080. So we should note that there are ways that we're going to be able to change this. I'm going to take a look at that in a later class. So everything looks good. It says it's exposing one endpoint called the actuator. So we'll take a look at that in 1 second. And the rest is just basic feedback that we'll be getting. Now, as we add more and more to our web application, there will be more feedback. Every time we have an endpoint, it will let us know that there's a new endpoint that we can access. But right now, because we've added the actuator as a dependency, it's automatically created an endpoint for us. Okay, so you'll notice that also right now the web app is currently listening for requests that are coming in. So what this is just a web server. It's mimicking a web server that is listening to requests from a client. So even though it is a mimic of a web server, it actually runs exactly as a web server would. So I'm just going to come over here and I'm going to type in localhost. So localhost is this thing that I can use in place of a domain. So typically when we access a service on the web, we would call on a domain. So something.org or something.com / something, right? So all of these are ways that we can access the resources that are online. Now, localhost is talking about we don't want to go online. We don't want to go on the internet, but we want to look locally for such a server. And we want to look on the port 8080, and that's it, right? So I want to connect to localhost / 8080. And if we hit this endpoint, you'll see that we get a white label error page, which is good because that means that we have a valid server that is actively listening for the client's requests. So it was hearing our request. It just so happens that we haven't programmed that endpoint to give us anything. It hasn't given us any resources as a response. So we're getting this white label error. This is a 404 error, which is file not found or resource not found, but that's good because we know the server is running properly. Okay, but what is working is this endpoint called actuator, right? So if we go to /actuator, we should be able to see that it's giving us something back. And this something is, if you look closely, is in the form of a JSON object, right? So this JSON object has a property called links. And this is, again, where the links are going to be located for our application. There's a couple more things that, will give you a little bit of health diagnostics and current state of your server, but for not too much that is very important. But nonetheless, we can check that our server is running. Now, another thing that we could check is that, remember we uploaded this icon.png into our static folder. So if we now navigate to localhost 8080 and then we do icon.png, this should give us this icon that we've uploaded. Okay, and this could be just a resource that we're going to use for another page or something like that. Okay. So static means that it is just a file that you look up on the local file structure, and we're going to use the static for things like text files or resources, maybe JSON files perhaps we could put in the static folder. So things that never change, we're going to put in the static folder. Now, if we use JSON files and we're going to read and write to it, then that should probably go somewhere else in your application. Okay, so static folders are only for files that are not going to change. All right, so I think that's all I want to talk about in this demo. What we're going to do, the next step in our web application is we're going to come over here and we're going to add to this application. So currently, all we're really doing is running this demo 1 application. But what if I wanted to add more functionality to it? So we're going to talk about that in our next class. All right, so I hope this was helpful. Let me know if you have any questions. Feel free to email me. Otherwise, I'll see everybody next time.